Hi, welcome back. Hope you had a nice lunch break. As promised, we are here with our next talk titled Road Towards Character Art by Beatrice Harty. Beatrice has been working with character art for AAA games since 2014 and been part of titles such as The Division, Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, and most recently Project 007 with IOI. The latter where she now works as lead for the character department. She is passionate about storytelling and loves to nerd into all the little details surrounding the whys and hows of the characters on screen. Please welcome on stage Beatrice Harty.
Thank you. I hope, yeah, you can hear me okay, right? Good, good, good. I will get my little clicker. Did you all have a good lunch? Some nice wraps? Good. And hello online. I don't know where you see me. I think over there. I hope there's some people checking in as well. So yes, we're gonna talk some characters and character art for video games. And this is me. My name is Beatrice. I'm a lead and senior character artist. And as my nice little introduction said, I've been doing this for about 10 years. Time flies when you have fun. I was just talking about it with Mina, that she was like, oh man, it's been 10 years. And I'm like, yeah, it's crazy because it doesn't feel like 10 years. But of course, if you start to look at certain events, you're like, okay, yeah, that was a while ago. But it's been a good ride. But where did it all start then? So for me, I've been drawing my whole life since I was a very small child. I think the way that I processed the world was very visual. I would be drawing things that I saw on TV. Like I remember drawing like figure skating dresses after I've been watching these figure skating like shows and whatnot. And I would be drawing little cartoons of me doing things that I wanted to experience, like trips that maybe my family couldn't afford to go on, like I would draw them as a comic and sort of me doing them. And also things that I did that I thought was really fun. I sort of created little comics of how I went about it and me and my friends doing things and whatnot. So that has always been sort of a part of me and my childhood and me growing up. And of course, growing a bit older, I started to hang out with these guys. So I think Morrowind, Elder Scrolls, the Morrowind installment was like my first big sort of game love. I had played games before that, but that was like the point where I'm like, man, this is actually really fun. I love the interactivity of it. I love that you could sort of create your own journey and you get to sort of interact with these characters. And I mean, they're not like amazing looking. They were okay for their time, I guess, even though they're absolutely horrifying to look back on. But I remember, like, for Oblivion, the guy to the right there, I remember when that game came out, I thought those characters were so realistic. Like, that was amazing. And I remember there was like a modding toolkit that came with Morrowind that I actually tried to open, me being 10 years old, and like very quickly gave up because I didn't understand anything. But I think there was something already there that was quite curious to like how would be sort of making these things and taking a little bit more of an active role in it. But I don't think I ever dreamt actually about being a game developer, which I think is one of those things where it's very important when we start to talk about things like representation, that we actually see people like us in the industry, because you didn't at the time. I think it's still fairly recently we're actually started to show off, you know, not just white men. Even though they are great, there's a lot of other people that are making games and a lot of other people that should be making games, right? But if you can't see yourself amongst those people, I think a lot of us, not even consciously, you know, go for a choice where we can see ourselves in that world. And I didn't. So I started to sort of think about a little bit like what I wanted to do. Went to upper secondary school. At that time, there were no game-specific upper secondary schools, really. And I knew I wanted to do something creative, something where I could probably like use my skill assets with the sort of visual 2D part of what I've done, but didn't really know where I was going to go about it. So I went to Ireland after upper secondary and worked as an au pair. Went back, didn't really know what I was going to do yet either, so I went a year and studied in Japan. And also, can we appreciate that I managed to find like the two most stereotypical pictures ever for these two countries. And I had sort of promised myself that after I was coming back from Japan, like I needed to figure my shit out. Like, what was I gonna do with my life? What would be sort of something that could suit me and my skill set, and something I could have fun with for potentially the rest of my life? So, of course, I started to think and be like, okay, I know I wanted to do something visual, but at the same time, I wanted to work with people, work in teams potentially. I could not really see myself working as an illustrator or something more sort of concept arty maybe, because I didn't want to be completely in my own little bubble. So I started to add all of these things together, and I know that I had seen like some kind of documentary, I think it was from Pixar, where they showed a little bit of like 3D models, and that fascinated me because it looked visual, but there was also like a challenge there that looked a little bit technical and something different that was like a completely new world to me. And I'm like, yeah, maybe something 3D-ish could be fun. Maybe there was something there that sort of tickled my brain a little bit. And adding all of this together, I thought, of course, marketing, commercials, that would be great. Then I can work with 3D, and that could be really fun. Because once again, I didn't even think of games being an option, sadly. I don't think I was aware that there was like a big scene in the region here. I grew up in Södra Sandby, if anyone is aware of that. It's a little bit like 1 hour, half hour away from Malmö. So I wasn't aware of that, and I think I just didn't really see it as, yeah, an option for me, right? My perception of games and making games was that it was a bunch of dudes in a cellar in the United States, off in the middle of nowhere somewhere. So I took a few straight courses, sort of testing the waters a little bit on the marketing side to see if it was something that I would enjoy, which I'm very happy I did because I hated it. I absolutely loathed it. And I'm sure like marketing can be great for people that are into that. But for me, I remember I got like a course book on basically how to exploit people psychologically to buy shit that they don't need or want. And I was like, this is not what I want to do. This is not how I want to spend my years. So I backed out of that one and was once again kind of stuck, but what do I do now? This was not it. What options do I have? And it was maybe 2 months later that I decided I was not going to continue with this path. That I was sitting and scrolling some art page. It might have been DeviantArt, actually, because ArtStation didn't exist back then. And I remember clicking like an image that I thought was really beautiful. And then went to the artist, and I saw that it was a woman that was Swedish. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. A lady from Sweden. Okay, let's read more about who this person is. And in the little sort of profile story thing, she mentioned that she studied game art at a school called the Game Assembly in Malmö. And I'm like, what? What is this? And she had a little link to the school's homepage. So I clicked on that and was like mind blown. Like, this is a thing? Like, you can do this? That is so cool. And I would have loved to say that that was when everything clicked. No. I literally went, that is fantastic. That seems like so much fun. Clicked it down. It's a shame I can't do that. And I went out, and I remembered I brewed a cup of coffee. And luckily enough, I had enough sort of critical thinking that while I was waiting for that coffee to drip down, I kind of went, why wouldn't I be able to do that? I mean, if she can, maybe I can, you know? And that started to sort of bleed a little bit more into my thoughts. And yes, eventually I did apply to the Game Assembly. This was 2012, and got in there during fall, and had an amazing 2 years there. And as a lot of other people, I was leaning more into sort of the 2D side of things at the start, because that was where I was comfortable, that was where I had been kind of before that, like in the rest of my life, right? And between first year and second year, I was convinced I was going to be an animator. And I loved animation, I still do. And I think there's something there that appeals to me a lot, even as a character artist, because it's still about the character and bringing out emotions and bringing out, you know, some sort of connection to what you see on screen. But when I started second year, we got to try out ZBrush, which is, if you're not familiar, it's sort of like a sculpting software, a bit similar to sculpting with clay, but digitally. And I just felt at home. I was just convinced almost immediately, like this is what I need to do. This is my jam. I love it. So started to pursue becoming a character artist, and eventually also sort of applied for my internship with that. And for your eyes only, I managed to find some of my old portfolio pieces that I actually applied with. And this is, mind you, this is quite old at this time. It's, for what it is and for the time, it could have been worse. But of course, there's a lot of things that looks pretty wonky. But there's some good nostalgia in here. And it did land me an internship with Massive Entertainment, where I started out my career. And also, by the way, a little bit of a tip. Like, I was super into Star Trek, the original series at the time, so I made these guys for fun. And while they end up with slightly, you know, unfortunate-looking faces, if you start to look at it a little bit more in detail, they were a great conversation starter when I started to talk to the companies, because there was this dose of nostalgia for them and something sort of fun. So I think that landed me a few points, even though they might not have been the bestly sort of executed. But yes, so I started to work on the Division 1, got into sort of full production there, which was super fun, learned a lot. Division 2, helped them out in the last phase of production there, to get everything sort of in order before that was shipped, because I had actually already started to work on Avatar Frontiers of Pandora at the time, where it was super fun. I got sort of the responsibility together with one of the character artists to start up the team there and really put down the foundations, how we wanted to do things, how we wanted the characters to look, and, you know, how should the gear system be, and how should that work with the design, and maybe live in the future, and how could we build on this, and how do we art direct then, and, you know, all of those things. So it was a really, really cool thing to get to do sort of relatively early in your career, but also learned so much, both artistically, but also I think building teams, getting to use sort of teams to bring out the best from people. So that was really, really good. But at one point I had been with Massive for almost 8 years, and I was kind of feeling that I needed to do something different. I wanted to try a few different things and sort of not get stagnant a little bit. It's quite easy when you do kind of the same thing repeatedly that you kind of feel like you stop growing, and I didn't really want to end up there. So I quit, I resigned, and started to work for a company called Shape Farm that is in Tokyo. And I was really looking forward to that. I was gonna get, you know, use my Japanese again and, you know, dust all that rust off, and that was gonna be great. It was pandemic though, so I ended up being stuck in my bedroom, working remotely, and I love having people around me, so that was not the best. But it was a great team and I had fun. It was working on something that was very, very stylized. So it was very different from everything I had done before. And after about 6 months, the CEO approached me and said, hey, we have a sister company called A44 in New Zealand, and they are going to finish up their game, Flintlock Siege of Dawn. And they need someone that can do realistic characters to come in and help them polish everything up. They need some help on the main cast there. And I said, of course, I'll help them out. So I ended up working on Flintlock, which, it was still pandemic. I was still stuck at home in my bedroom. And before, I had at least half the day with my teammates, with the time difference to Japan. New Zealand, no hours, no overlapping hours. I had one weekly meeting, 7 o'clock in the morning, one weekly meeting, 11:30 in the evening with them. So after 6 months of that, I said, oh, it's great working with you guys, but the time difference isn't that great. So I started to look around and eventually ended up with IOI, where they was looking for a lead character artist for the 007 project. So I've been there now for about 2 years, which also time flies. That is crazy. And that has been really, really fun. So I have a character team, but more so a character department, where we have the character concept artist, we have the 3D character artist, and also the skinner rigger sort of together in one big team. So we can sort of really bring out the best from those people working together and having great communications. And that has been wonderful. And just quickly run by, I also found some old stuff from the Division time that I did. We never showed any textured stuff or in-game stuff because we had really low resolution textures back then. So this was how we all showed our portfolio pieces. And also some stuff from Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which is the latest thing I can show from any other projects that I worked on, because that's the reality of AAA. It takes a heck of a long time to develop our games. That is a fun thing, but it can also be a little bit of a pain in the ass because your portfolio ends up being quite outdated if you rely on only those pieces. But yeah, that was my sort of little road up until the present moment. So I would like to just kind of touch upon, what your road could look like. There are a few different options today, I think, that we didn't necessarily have before, or it wasn't at least as prevalent. So the first thing I think we can talk a little bit about is going to a school, like a game school, or if we want to do self-study. It's not impossible to self-study. There's a lot of good material online today. I would say it's tricky, because while there is a lot of information, it's a little bit hard to know what information is good information, what to focus on, what is actually important to know, because you're not going to have time to learn all of it, right? That is impossible. And a school can sort of help you with that. Of course, there are some amazing people that did self-study and they managed to do all of those things on your own. I will say it's quite often, from what I've seen, that people end up with a little bit of gaps in the knowledge when they have done self-study. It's not impossible, but going to a school sort of gets you a little bit on a fast track, so that makes it easier. Another thing to consider, I would say, especially maybe in how the industry looks today, and the competitiveness of getting your first job, is the internship. It helps a lot to be able to do that. And of course, the school can often provide you with contacts with the companies directly, so you don't have to go and contact them yourself and look for internship yourself in that sense. So it makes things a little bit easier. So that would be sort of my general recommendation there. This is something I get asked about a lot. Stylized characters or realistic characters, what should I choose? Do a bit of introspection. I will say, though, you need to choose one, at least at the start of your career. And that can be tough because I think a lot of us kind of enjoy doing both, or we don't really know yet. And certainly you can jump in between later in your career, so I would say don't worry too much about it. But for a portfolio, for getting into the industry, I think it's quite important to show what it is that you want to do, but also what you are the best at doing. And usually we do have one of them that we will be a little bit stronger in. For me, I enjoyed making realistic characters a lot, but as I told you guys, after a couple of years of doing that, I wanted to do something different. So I jumped to being very, very stylized. It was an anime game, so it was completely different stylized. You can do that. You can jump in between. But at the start of your career, pick one and try to focus on that. If we're talking portfolio specifically, you can, of course, have a main focus in your portfolio, but you can always have like an extra page where you show up some of your personal projects. And if you love making stylized characters, but you think like, hey, I think I want to actually do realistic characters for a job maybe, and that is going to be my main thing, like put your the stylized characters or some stylized sculpt or something on a second page that you can just show for fun if the companies are interested. It's never a bad thing, but you need to have sort of one focus, I would say. I'm also realizing we can barely see what's on screen. It's so light in this room now. Yeah. At least we see the text. You know, it's the high contrast thing that we got to learn earlier, right? So good enough, I suppose. All right, I wanted to touch a little bit upon storytelling and what we can do design-wise. This is, I think, one of the most important things for me as a character artist, but also when reviewing portfolios, that we get some good storytelling into our characters, that we can get a sense of who they are and where they belong in the world, that you can sort of look at it and get a lot of information already just from the visuals. So to start it off, there is a kind of interesting thing that is called the spoiler paradox. That is essentially that if we do get a little bit spoiled on a story, let's see, it might be the ending of a movie or a TV show, if it's just a little bit, we're actually gonna like that show more than if we didn't get spoiled, which is kind of weird. I'm also one of those people like, I hate spoilers. Hate it, don't tell me anything. But sort of scientifically proven, we tend to actually appreciate something more because that makes us able to connect with the story a little bit better, maybe understand it better from the start. If we know already a little bit of what's going to happen, we can see it in a different light. And you can sort of have the same approach with characters, actually, that we want to be able to get a sense of who they are already before we see them in the story. I think one of the easiest way to start with that is just looking at basic shapes. They're also fairly universal. We tend to read, triangle shapes is the classic one for something that is evil. It's kind of the same whether we're in Sweden or whether we're in Vietnam. We all tend to read that fairly similarly. Colors can be a little bit different. That can be cultural. So that is just good to keep in mind. But of course we have if anyone is actually able to see anything on this screen at the moment, but often dark colors, right, at least here in the West, for our villains, and a lot of these triangle shapes. I guess you guys will just have to sort of imagine all the triangle shapes here, but we have Darth Vader, he's fairly well known. We have Daenerys with her cape, and there's a lot of triangle shapes going on her dressing towards the end of her journey. So a lot of sort of foreshadowing you can do with just the costumes that they're wearing, how they're carrying them, and all of that stuff. And of course, in the flip side, our good characters tends to have quite round shapes, a lot of earthy colors, neutral colors, to make them feel grounded and something that you can sort of instantly like. So there's some very sort of easy tricks that you can easily apply, and that is very used also all over sort of entertainment business and the characters that we see there. And like I said earlier, it's always good to be able to look at a character and sort of get a sense of who they are. So now I just kind of stole the concept art from Square Enix here, Life is Strange, the first game. Where you can sort of have these two characters, and just by looking, you get a little bit of a sense who they are. You get a little bit of a sense they probably don't have the same attitude. They're probably a little bit different here. There's a bit of a contrast between them in a sense. And we can tell that they're probably going to school. She has a school bag. fairly young, and of course the friend there probably a little bit rebellious. So you get a little bit of a spoiler, in a sense, of who they are, which can help you connect to them. That, of course, doesn't mean that we should try to lean into, damaging stereotypes. So be aware of that. But it does mean that we can add these cues to make it a little bit easier for people to connect. It's also about context when we create our characters. This is, I do apologize for this. Hopefully your brain will fill in a little bit. But this is from Flintlock, Siege of Dawn. And what we would be able to see if we could see anything on this screen is that she has a very dark sort of military jacket, and then she has bright red pants. This is a third-person game, and this is our main character. And when I got brought onto this project, I was asked to first write some feedback that I had on things that we could possibly address on these characters, and then, of course, eventually get along to actually fix those things. Does anyone have a sense for what could be problematic in this? Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that could be a problem, absolutely, that it's a little bit more villain type. You're right, it's a little bit more villain type colors, for sure. An additional problem with the red pants, keep in mind this is being a third-person game, red being a signal color, we just ended up looking at her butt. That was the focal point of the character. Not intended focal point, but that was what happened. You kind of immediately went like, whoop, that was okay. This is weird, So that was amongst one of the points that we started to talk about how to address. So we added like a really shiny holster on her back, where she could like put her pistol, and it was like a brass thing so it would catch the light and whatnot. We darkened down the pants a little bit, muted the color a little bit, and also brightened up her jacket. So you didn't immediately go to her butt when you played, because that's a little bit unfortunate. So of course, context and how we see the characters in game. Is it a third-person game we're intending this character from? Is it a first-person game? And even if you're not in the industry yet, you might be making some portfolio pieces, they are probably going to ask you, the people reviewing, like, what did you intend this character for? What kind of setting is this supposed to be, and how do we see it, right? So do think about that. And of course, if it's very stylized, it might be a top-down. And then, of course, the silhouette from the top becomes very important. So just keep that in mind and be prepared to have some reasoning around the choices that you did. And it should be good to go. This is sort of my main tip, really, for making games in general, but also making characters, especially when starting out. Don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple. Keep it to something that you can pull off in time. If you're making a realistic character, that can take a lot of time. That can be months of work. So try to keep it as something you can pull off before you're due to show your portfolio, before you want to make your application to the internship or the company, whatever it is. But try to keep it simple. A well-made, simple character will always be better than a very, very complex one that you didn't manage to pull off. And of course, that could go for a lot of disciplines as well, right? It's sort of a good general rule to keep in mind. But we do often want to try to flex our sort of technical abilities, and we want to try to make sure that we show that we can do everything. And that doesn't usually become very good, because it's very rare that we actually are very good at everything. So stick to the things that you're really good at and try to show that. This is also when it comes to softwares. This is ZBrush. If you can see it, it's the standard brush, it's the Damien standard and the Move tool. It's the most unsexy brushes that exist. Those are the 3 ones that I use the most, to 98%. That goes for almost any other industry professional that I know of. ZBrush, though, does have maybe 80 brushes or more in the package. And when you start out, it's so easy to think that, you know, the mastery is learning all of these amazing brushes, and that is gonna, you know, what's gonna bring me that amazing looking character and these complex things. Like I just need to figure out where that cool tool is. And unfortunately, that's not quite the case. They do have use cases, but it's quite rare. But just sticking to the basics will get you so much further, and don't spend time on trying to learn all of these very, very advanced or very sort of special case brushes, because that is usually not where you get, you know, the most out of it. It's sort of, you know, another parallel is Photoshop. It's the same thing there. There's always going to be people trying to sell you really fancy packages of brushes and like this cloud brush here and this texture brush here and this, and you can think that, maybe that is what I've been missing. If I just buy this package, like I will just up my drawing skills so much. Like I've done that. You know, I think that's very common to think that, yeah, but you know, then I will be able to make this texture surface like this art that I saw somewhere. Amazing. And you get it, and then you sadly realize that it wasn't the brushes. It was me all along. And you know, that goes for ZBrush as well. And especially if you're getting into 3D, it takes a lot of time to get into it and learn it properly, so do focus on the basics and don't get steered away by these sort of nice pipe dreams of advanced tools. Cloth is very important as a character artist. We of course have you know, different asset types. We have making heads, faces, hair, garments. Depending on the project and the company, of course, we can have animals and creatures, monsters, but we tend to do a lot of clothing. So that is a good skill to have, maybe the most important skill to have. And I look a lot at folds. I look a lot of folds every day, but also when I look in portfolios, I want to make sure that people understand folds. A good little tip that helped me a lot early on was to just find good reference pictures and start to trace the folds with a red pen to sort of understand how they flow together, how they behave, you know, where the folds compress and how they change shape. What's the difference between an organic material and something a little bit stiffer, you know, natural fibers versus synthetic fibers, and really sort of understand what's going on. I think especially today, we have some really nice tools out there to help speed up the process, like Marvelous Designer that simulates folds and clothing. Those are fantastic. But what I'm also seeing a lot is that people rely on that very early on in their career without necessarily understanding the material, and they make clothing that just look a little bit off. It's almost a bit like Uncanny Valley for clothing, because they don't understand the material or why the folds behave that way. They might not have the knowledge to really change the material settings and play around with that to get the right effect. So you know, often see a lot of, you know, people have been making jeans, like denim jeans, but it has like silky folds and it just immediately just looks off. So it can be good to, for practice sake, try a little bit of hand sculpting folds every now and then. We do it rarely from scratch in the industry nowadays, just because Marvelous Designer speeds it up so much. But for your own practice, for your own eye, training your own artistic eye, that is a very good exercise to do, to just have a better understanding. Make your own reference material. There's a lot of it online, but I think it's great also to sort of train yourself and understand what's going on, that you do go out in real life and find these materials. So if it wants to go forward, yeah, there we go. So for instance, we had, this is so hard to see, I do apologize, but we had this happening actually with my team not too long ago, and I love showing off these pictures. I thought it was an amazing day. But we had an instance where we were gonna put makeup on our characters. And we realized very quickly that a lot of the team, being guys, did not have that much experience doing makeup. And of course, the makeup that they put on the characters looked like someone that was putting on makeup for the first time, you know, which is not that strange, really. But we do realize, like, okay, we need to fix this. So how do we fix this? Well, probably the best way to fix that is to allow them to sort of play with it and have fun with it. So we arranged a day where some of us made a bit of a workshop first where we talked about it and talked about the history of makeup and like what to think about when you apply it and all those things, right? And then we had a bunch of makeup. Both we ordered some online and people brought in some stuff that they didn't use anymore, and they could just go ham. So they teamed up 2 and 2 and added makeup on each other and got some advice along the way and had a really, really good time. And then, of course, we tied it together with like getting some nice reference photos that we could use for later and see how things like different light scenarios affects the face when it has makeup versus not makeup and whatnot, so we actually could use it too. But that was super fun, and everyone was such a good sport about it. And I think some of the guys were so surprised as well, because they had not really tried this before, and then they got to try it, and they were like, oh my gosh, like I look so good in this red lipstick. And I'm like, yes, you do. Like one of them, he refused to take it off. He wandered around in the office like that for the rest of the day, and he was like, yeah, no, this is fantastic. Which was also fun, right? That you get to sort of bring people a little bit out of a different context and get them to, I think, play around with, I mean, makeup in this case, but also like art in general, right? That we see it more as a space where we can play and have fun with, and therefore also sort of become better at it. So that was a great day. Figure drawing is also a great exercise to help you understand anatomy, the human form, also the human form sort of in motion, and get that grasp. Oop, sorry. Clay sculptures is something I enjoy doing a lot. It sort of takes me back to the early ZBrush days a little bit, before it became a work thing. So I sort of also find that play space. And it helps me practice things like I can't use the mirror tool anymore, so I need to actually like hand sculpt all of these things, and of course hand sculpt the folds and all of those things, so you need to think a little bit differently. But also a great, great, great practice, especially nice to get away from the screens, when we're sitting in front of the screen all day to do something slightly different. And if we do find ourselves, you know, we're gonna make a character, we're gonna create a portfolio piece, but we might not really know where to start. I think a great point of reference is actually a bunch of, you know, just kind of start up your favorite movie and start screen grabbing. Because what they can do that is actually really helpful, that we have a little bit of harder time doing in games, is that they can art direct every frame. And they do. They do it very well as well. So it's a great thing to use as a reference for your own color schemes, your own compositions when you create something and just get inspired from. So I'm just gonna run you through some of my favorites that you barely can see, but you know, enjoy it anyways, from some recent favorites of mine from the past year or so. So just like, you know, the framing composition just of this frame, there's obviously a lot of thought that went into it. The color schemes, all of that. Everything Everywhere All at Once, amazing movie, also just amazing art direction. You can freeze any frame and it just looks amazing. Has some really cool contrasty colors going on here. You can sort of sense an emotion of a character just by looking at it fairly quickly, even without knowing the context of the movie itself. And it can be fairly simple and still tell a story. And even though you might not always know the story, you can sense that it's something there and it makes you interested. So this is from Perfect Days, a Japanese movie that was up for Oscars this year. Really, really interesting movie, but like very simple clothing, very simple sort of setting, and still it tells a story with the light coming through. You know, the posing of the character, how you frame everything. That can be sort of a great inspiration to get you started. And what was it called in English again? The plane crash movie. Does anyone know which one I'm talking about? Society of the Snow, his name, was another great one that I absolutely loved. We're also like, you know, it was really fun to see how they took the fashion from the 70s, I think it was, and make that work, and how their clothing and the characters sort of wore down a little bit over time because they're stuck in this mountain region where their plane crashed, and they're there for, I think it was 72 days or something like that. Crazy story, but Also like how that affects clothing, right? What they're wearing, all those kind of things. That is great to add a layer of storytelling. So that is really, really cool to just be able to go through. And of course, you pick your own favorite movies and go through, right? This is just some of the ones that really, really inspired me from the past year. And there are some great tools to be able to apply on this online. This is a lot of different colors, which is turning black now. But there's a lot of different blues and vibrant hues going on here. And it is a frame from Shape of Water, if anyone has seen that. So it's some lovely, lovely blue hues. And you can essentially just plug in a frame from any movie here, and it will give you all the colors that's in that frame. That can also be great if you don't know maybe where to start when it comes to, color theory and how you can set a mood or whatnot. You can use pages like this to sort of pick that out for you. And another, I think, great tip is to look at the old painting masters. I think that's something that people bring up a lot, but at the same time, it is kind of underrated. These people have figured out a lot of these things long time ago, and it still holds up today. When it comes to composition, lighting, silhouette, you can, look at like Rembrandt and all of these people and look at their frames and be like, what is it that makes this interesting? What is it that actually made these portraits so famous as they did become, right? Often they have very interesting silhouettes and color choices, but also they usually tend to have some sort of emotional connection that you can feel. Like there might be something in the glint of their eyes or the way that they kind of look at the painter, the framing of their face, right? That makes you kind of feel that sort of emotional connection a little bit. And that's usually what we want to be able to create great characters. And I think that was it. And I will switch this over to Q&A session.
Thank you so much for the talk and sharing your recommendations. So now the floor is open for questions. Yes?
Hi, thanks you so much for the talk. I have a question regarding at the beginning, when you're researching to start characters, start a game. How much research goes into, for example, you mentioned trying to avoid stereotypes or when to avoid, cultural appropriation. How much research goes into that, and how much of a say do you have in that, or like other people in the company?
That's a good question. I mean, it depends on the setting of the game, I would say, but there's quite a lot of research being done. But I would also say that is one of the areas where I think it's so important that we have a diverse set of developers, because it's not always that the problems are obvious if you're not a diverse crew doing it from the start, right? So I've been, like, generally, if we're talking like as a woman, I've had a very good experience in the games industry throughout. But I've had instances where people make assumptions, maybe, in terms of like game design. As an example, fairly early on, we were talking about a customization system. And a guy on the team was going to create this customization system, and he was very excited, and he kind of came over to tell me that, like, yeah, but I'm thinking I'm going to do this great thing, and I'm going to be really sort of inclusive towards women in it, so I'm going to like add makeup for the women as a customization feature. And that was great, except for this was supposed to be agents that were like outside and gritty, haven't really been in society for a really long time. So it was one of those like, yeah, but that maybe isn't their priority if they have been outside, without food and water for several weeks. Maybe it's not like the mascara that they bring with them out, And after we had that discussion, it was like, yeah, no, you're right. So having, for instance, more women, more people with a bit of diverse backgrounds and histories can sort of help spot potential issues. And sometimes we don't spot them until we're like halfway through the development, and that is just how it is, unfortunately. But as long as we do spot them, that's great. So that is why we kind of need our diverse things. But we try to do a lot of research at the start, for sure. But we don't discover all the things there. Quite a lot, but of course, if we're talking AAA, then we will start the process with a character concept artist that sort of interprets the vision from a director. And ideally, you should spot problems already there so that the 3D character artists don't have to, change the design, because then ideally you should have spotted the design problems earlier on. But of course, it does happen. Sometimes it doesn't make sense in 3D or will be problematic in 3D for different reasons. And then we need to bring it up. But that's usually not a problem per se. If it's something problematic, then it's something problematic and we'll need to do something about it. So quite a lot, I would say.
Any other questions?
Thank you for the talk. When you look into portfolios, you obviously maybe look at skill, but do you also take taste level and cultural references into considerations as well? Like, let's say someone is super skilled, but only does like this mascara thing, for example, and stuff like that.
Yes, I mean, depending on the level of problematic there, but for me it matters, for sure, because it ties into storytelling, being able to portray realistic characters and characters that people can and want to relate to. So if you're very off in terms of what real people would do or behave, then of course there will be some kind of dissonance that wouldn't feel great. It's of course something that you can address in a potential interview if you feel like, okay, their skill level is super high, maybe they just haven't really had an honest conversation with someone before that could tell them, hey, this feels a little bit iffy or whatnot, right? Sometimes it's just ignorance. And I would say that's actually the case with a lot of problematic characters, for instance, or problematic choices. It's not that people necessarily do them because they want to do bad choices. It's usually because they haven't really been questioned. No one has been there to say, hey, maybe we should talk about this. So sometimes that's enough, but it's not a plus point in my book, no. And of course, depending on the level of how bad it is, it might be an issue to just discard it completely, right? If it's something that just feels culturally super inappropriate or, downright offensive, then of course that's not okay.
Hi. Okay, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned in the beginning whether it's a good idea to go to get a gaming education or continue with self-study. So I was wondering if you think there are any drawbacks to get a gaming education a bit later in life, and how does the industry perceive this?
I don't think there's any drawbacks, really. Especially, of course, here in Scandinavia, where we get education for free, more or less. If that is something that you want to pursue, I don't think that's a problem. We got 2 new juniors to the team this year, and both of them are over 30. So that is not a hinder. I would say almost the opposite. For instance, these 2 people, right? They are really good character artists, and they will be a great asset to the team. But what they have that maybe someone being 21 years old and just starting their job usually does not have is that they have had a bunch of different jobs before usually. They've been in different contexts with teams and usually can pull their weight in terms of communication and being sort of outside of their own little bubble a lot better. So I would say it can almost be a plus, for sure.
We still have, we do have a question online, so let's hear that.
They ask, how do you think juniors should approach art directors or seniors to receive feedback or to be hired?
To be hired is a different thing because that would usually go through a recruiter and potentially a hiring manager that would look through the portfolios and then based on that contact you or not. But feedback within a company, I'm trying personally to promote a culture where rank doesn't really matter. I want my juniors to come with input to my seniors. I want my seniors to come with input to my juniors. I want the art director to be involved. Because you can learn so much from everyone. We all have different set of eyes, and we will see different things. And while we might have different skill levels, because we have been doing this for 1 year or 10 years, there is going to be a difference there. But we still have good artistic eyes that we can use. And the juniors on my team, for instance, they spot really good things that other people might not. And also the fact that the juniors coming into the industry now, they have a whole different knowledge around the newest softwares and plugins and tools that the seniors might not always have. So it's a good sort of complementary factor going on there as well. So I don't think that should be a problem. Ideally, there should not be. I don't think I've worked actually on teams throughout the different companies where I've been aware that's been a huge issue. Of course, you might have the art director being more involved in some projects and less involved in some projects and whatnot, but on the team, as much as you can make people work together as close as possible, sort of non-dependent on seniority, that's usually for the better. I don't know if that was a good answer to the question, but yes, that should be promoted and that should happen, essentially. And for hiring, the process is a little bit different. But even though you might be going through an HR loop when you're getting hired, you can always reach out to people in the industry and ask for feedback and help. People are usually very, very friendly and helpful, and will give you, if it's portfolio feedback or some pointers, so that you can always do. If you want to just throw some people like a message on LinkedIn or something like that, people will usually reply.
Hi, thank you for your input so far. My question is, to become a character designer in game industry, is it required to know 3D modeling? Because in other disciplines, being a character designer is almost solely 2D design work. But so far, in the job descriptions, I've seen it's like 99% a 3D modeler role and not a 2D artist role.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, we're sort of talking about two different things, right? We're talking about a character concept artist and a 3D character artist. Correct? Yeah. So if you want to become a character concept artist and only do the 2D concepts, then you don't necessarily need to know any 3D. No. I will say it's a plus if you have some knowledge of it, because then you can anticipate some of the problems that your design might have and can adjust that accordingly. Then you're sort of less dependent on a 3D artist come in maybe after you're already done and gotten your concept signed off by the art director and everything, to go like, hey, actually, I will not be able to do this because it will deform like crap, or like, we need to have cloth simulation on here and it's gonna be in a boss fight and that will look weird because it's gonna fly everywhere. So if you have some knowledge, you will be able to, I think, just make your own concepts a little bit more production ready, but it's not a necessity. I have both, actually, on my team. I have character concept artists that have a little bit of 3D experience, and I have those that don't have at all. So it's different strengths.
Thank you. We still have time for one or two questions. If there's any in the audience or online? No?
I loved hearing about the makeup day. Did you get any pushback from the dudes?
No, not at all. They were wonderful sports. They actually embraced it. And I think that's, I don't know, maybe that was a bit of a learning for me, because I was kind of almost expecting a bit of pushback. But often when people get put in a scenario where they, I don't know, they get to feel safe. Of course, they need to create a space that feels safe for them. But where they're allowed to play a little bit as kids and just have fun with it, people tend to embrace it. And they did it beautifully. And it was a good experience just all throughout, and I got a lot of really good feedback from it afterwards. They even replicated the exercise in the Barcelona studio when they heard about it, and they're like, oh, we need to do the same thing, which they did. And they also had a bunch of guys that don't traditionally wear makeup come and join them and had a blast doing it. So sometimes it's just kind of creating a space for people, and they will join in.
It's